Rainbow trout are one of the most popular freshwater species to chase, and today I've got the 10 tips that are going to help you catch more rainbow trout. What is up, Outdoor Mavericks? Welcome back to the channel, to the latest trout fishing tips video solely dedicated today to rainbow trout. Now, rainbow trout was the first fish I ever chased when I was 4 years old on my first ever trout fishing mission. Now, whether you're fishing for stock trout or native trout, there are trout everywhere across the United States and the world, and it's one of the most fun freshwater fish to chase. So no matter what your skill set or how much experience you have chasing rainbow trout, I got the 10 tips today. They're going to help you catch and land more trout. Now, starting out with tip number 10 is to watch the weather. And this is really important when it comes to rainbow trout. Depending on the time of the year and the water conditions are going to really dictate how the fish are going to bite and how you're going to fish. Whether it's a super sunny, warm day, you're going to be better off fishing in the cooler parts in the early part and the evening time. But if it's very cold water, you're going to have to pick apart different little sections of the lake, the little stream, the river, wherever you're fishing to try to entice that bite. And with weather can come a lot of rain, you can have dirty water conditions, off water conditions, which is going to change the way that the trout react and where they're positioned in the water. And one key thing when it does come to weather is storm fronts. You want to kind of fish on the front end of a storm front coming in where the barometric pressure is changing a lot, because the trout fishing can go from an epic bite to no bites at all. And that weather front coming in plays a huge factor. So pay attention really closely to the weather and the water condition, and it's going to help you put a game plan together and catch more rainbow trout. Now, tip number 9 is for all those big lake rainbow trout anglers, and that is to watch for the lake turnover. And what I mean by the lake turnover is when the surface temperature is warmer than the water down below. At times during the year, the lake water and the surface temperature are going to change from either warm to cold or cold to warm, and it's going to be flipping flop. And when you pay attention to those really closely, you're going to figure out when the trout are going to be at their best bite and when they're going to be at their worst bite, or where the bite's going to turn off because of the way that that flips. But also, if the surface temperature is warmer and the water down below is a lot cooler, then you need to start fishing deeper. And the reverse is true. You want to fish a little bit shallower and towards the top of the water. So as you're fishing for trout, and especially when you're trolling, you want to look for that lake turnover where that temperature starts to flip, and that will help you focus in on the depth and the areas of where to chase some rainbow trout. And by understanding that flip of temperature, you're going to get yourself on some rainbow trout all the time. Now, tip number 8 is to use light tackle. Now, I've seen anglers go all the way down to 4-pound tests when it comes to trout fishing, which is absolutely true in those clear water, low conditions, especially in the summertime. But the heaviest I would go, especially when I'm throwing spinners and casting gear or even plunking, my main line, I usually stick with 10-pound braid as my go-to. You want to go with the lightest line possible that's going to have a lot of strength, a lot of durability, especially if you're casting or if you're plunking, and whether you're fly fishing as well. You don't need to use really heavy gear. You want to go as light as possible. Let that fish fight, and that light gear will allow you to get more bites. Now, with that light gear, you absolutely should not make big hook sets like you're bass fishing. And I've seen that way too many times over the last couple years. Big hook sets, guys break the hook, they snap their line. These are not bass. They're not salmon either. They're not big halibut. We're talking about, 12-inch rainbow trout for the most part. You do not need epic hook sets. And trust me, if you're setting the hook and falling on your butt, don't ask me how I know, you're doing it wrong. Now, tip number 7 is to stick to the basics when it comes to bait. We're talking power bait, night crawlers, spinners, flies. Those are the typical baits that you use when you're chasing rainbow trout. Now, there are thousands of different trout baits out on the market. And yes, some of us that geek out over baits, like myself, have dozens and dozens of different baits in the tackle box, 30 or more different colors of power bait. But at the end of the day, I would say focus on the basics, pick a few baits, and keep it simple. And sometimes that's the best way to move forward. You don't need 10,000 different flies. Just pick a few, get very good at fishing those, and really hone in on a few colors and a few styles, and that will allow you to simplify things on the water and hone in to get that perfect bite. And if you're like myself and you got over 30 jars of power bait, yeah, you need to go to therapy because you got a problem. Now, tip number 6 is to find structure. And this is really key no matter what type of fish you're chasing, but in particular for rainbow trout, you really need to focus in on structure, structure, structure. One of the reasons why you want to focus on structure is the trout like to hide behind that structure because one, it gets a little break in the current in the water to slow down and they don't have to exert as much energy when it comes to saying facing straight into the flowing water in a little stream and a little river. Allows them to kind of back off, not expend as much energy and eat some food and some grubs that are in the water that they're there. And secondly, it also provides them shade, some cooler water. It's less thrashy water, which is where they don't want to be hanging out. And it provides that opportunity to also stay away from other predator fish when they're in that little bit of structure. So as you're coming up to a body of water, look for those structure areas. Now we're talking structure, rocks, down limbs, down trees, and underwater grass. Find those pockets of areas and structure, focus in on them, and I think it's going to improve how many rainbow trout you actually catch at the end of the day. Now, tip number 5 is about matching. And no, I'm not talking about the match dating apps. I'm talking about matching your surroundings and matching the hatch. And let's start with match the hatch. Of course, it makes sense wherever you're fishing that you want your bait or your fly selection to match the baits that the trout are really eating and focusing in on. And this comes down to a few things. One, observing what the food sources are there and what the trout may be feeding on the surface. That'll give you an indication as to the spinner color, the type, and the type of flies that you want to be using to chase rainbow trout. And secondly, match your surroundings. And I've seen this way too many times. And of course, I have been guilty of this as well because I'm not paying attention, which is wearing bright colored clothes, a bright hat, something like in the orange color, something that really stands out. And in clear water, the trout can absolutely see you. Just like in hunting, you want to blend in and you don't want to stand out. So be very careful and pay attention to the color choice of your clothing and what you're wearing so you're not wearing super bright colors or the trout are going to see it and they're going to scatter and get out of there. Now, tip number 4 is something I preach all the time on the channel if you watched other videos, which is to fish early. And there's some huge benefits to that. One, you get that early rainbow trout bite when the sun is just coming up, the surface bugs are out. It's when the water temperature, especially on the surface and the upper part of the water column, is at its coolest, especially on warm nights in the summer. You want to get there early, get on that early bite, because as the sun comes up midday and starts to warm up, the water starts to warm up, the bite typically starts to shut down, the fish start to scatter, and that's where you need to be really careful about finding those areas with structure or shady, cooler water areas. But overall, when you talk about a day, a 24-hour period of a day, that early morning period from like 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. a lot of times is your best bet to get the best bite. You're going to have first crack at the trout every single time, and you're going to leave home very happy with a lot of fish hooked up. Now, coming into tip number 3 is to learn how to read the water, and that is really critical when it comes to chasing rainbow trout. And you really want to pay close attention to how the water's moving, how the structure is, if you're seeing fish hit the surface, how the water's rippling, the calmer water versus the faster water versus deeper pockets of water versus shallower pockets of water. All of those things matter. So as you come up to your body of water, before you even put a line in the water, pay close attention and just observe what is in front of you, what is happening. Just take a minute to look there, and especially if you have a fishing buddy or partner there, or you're taking somebody new fishing, say like a kid or somebody who's never been fishing for trout, just look at what's out there. Pay attention to the surface. Just observe for a second, stand back, and then pick apart what the body of water is in front of you to put a game plan together, and then that is the time to start fishing. And if you do that, and if you observe and you start to understand and read the water more and more, you're gonna have a better chance and give yourself the best opportunity to know which baits, where to throw those baits, and understand and think about where those trout might be holding in different bodies of water. You're going to give yourself a huge advantage on getting into those trout, especially the big rainbow trout in the fall. Now, tip number 2 has to do with bait again, and that is to just fish all kinds of bait. And rainbow trout are not picky whether you're fishing for natives or for stock trout. Rainbow trout will pretty much eat a lot of different baits. So as an angler, start throwing and using different baits and experimenting with different colors, different scent combinations, and just learn how to fish different baits through different techniques, whether it's bobber fishing, whether it's plunking, fly fishing, casting spinners, or trolling, and fish as many different baits as possible. Be because when you're in different situations, you're going to be able to adapt and adjust much faster and make bait and technique changes much more quicker, which means if something's not working and you switch more often and you're able to be comfortable with those different baits, it's going to give you a huge advantage and you're going to be able to get on a lot more rainbow trout at the end of the day and over the course of a year. As you practice that, you're going to start to see your numbers of your hook and your land ratio start going up and up and up. So now that we've gone through tips 10 through 2, well, what's tip number 1? Well, number 1 is to never stop fishing for rainbow trout. To me, rainbow trout fishing is two different things. You learn and you fish, and you repeat that over and over and over again. You never stop learning, you never stop fishing for rainbow trout. So grab your baits, grab your fishing rods, grab your gear, get out there and go chase some more rainbow trout. I hope you guys enjoyed today's tips video. Now get out there, apply these tips, and go chase and catch some more rainbow trout. And I'll see you guys on the next one. And as always, the outdoors is a gift. Share it with others.